All right. It's a few minutes after 1 and the numbers have leveled off, so I think we'll try to get started here. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Sarah Romeo. I'm the moderator for this session. So, first of all, we're here for strategic planning in a time of transition, what we've learned 1 year in. Presented by Maria Cabaniss. Maria is the director of the library at Our Lady of the Lake University in San Antonio, Texas. Maria holds a Master's of Science in Library and Information Science from the University of North Texas and a Master's of Theological Studies from Emory University. So everyone, welcome Maria. Take it away.
Well, hello everyone. Give me just a minute here can you all hear me okay? Awesome. Okay, give me just a minute to go ahead and share my screen. And I will go ahead and start the slideshow. Okay, well, first, let me thank you all very much for taking the time to attend my presentation. As Sarah said, my name is Maria Cabaniss, and I am the director of the Sueltenfuss Library at Our Lady of the Lake University in San Antonio. And the title of my presentation is Strategic Planning in a Time of Transition, What We've Learned 1 year in. So my presentation today is really a case study of one small university library's experience with strategic planning, and we're still in the process of implementing it. So this is sort of our take on it, having gone through the planning process and now moving through the implementation phase. So my goal for today is to talk a little bit about what is strategic planning and what are the benefits of strategic planning. Then I'm going to talk a little bit about our institutional context, both about the university and about a little bit about the library and what led us to embark on a strategic planning process. Then I'm going to spend quite a bit of time discussing our process for strategic planning, as well as our implementation and our year 1 results. And then I'm going to, the last part of the presentation, we'll look at lessons learned and takeaways, as well as challenges, as well as what some of the impacts of COVID were on our strategic planning process. And then I'll also, at the end, have some resources that we found helpful to share with you as well. So some of the, even though this is really a case study of one university's experience, some of the questions that I hope to answer are, what is strategic planning and why is it important? What are some of the strategies and tools for developing and implementing a library strategic plan? What are some of the challenges, and how did COVID impact our planning? So the Business Dictionary defines strategic planning as a systematic process of envisioning a desired future and translating this vision into broadly defined goals or objectives. And really, for me, there's 3 components to a strategic plan: the planning process, implementation, and assessing. And I think that assessment piece is really important, because if you don't have a way to measure your success, then you don't know if your strategic planning was successful. What are some of the benefits of strategic planning? So from my perspective, having gone through this process, there are several reasons why I think it is beneficial for a library to engage in a strategic planning process. One of these is that it allows you to align with institutional priorities. So it really helps you think about what are the larger goals and vision and mission of your university or your institutional context. And if you can align your strategic plan with those broader university goals, then I think it can help you be more successful in getting momentum going with some of your initiatives and services that you would like to do. It can also help you determine how to allocate limited resources. So many of us know that right now is a very difficult time during COVID, but just in higher education in general. Many budgets are very tight. You want to make strategic investments in the future of your library, but how do you prioritize? Strategic planning can help you do that. It can help you decide where is it. It can really help you pinpoint where is it that you want to spend those limited resources. Another benefit is that it's very focused on the future and trends. So it forces you to think about not just what are the current circumstances, but what are the things you need to think about in 2 years, in 3 years, in 5 years, in 10 years. And in doing that, it allows you to respond to current and anticipated user needs. I think that a strategic plan for a university library is really beneficial if it is user-centered, meaning that you're really focusing on the community that you serve and what their needs are going to be. It helps you build a plan for realizing a vision and goals. So it's great. Many organizations have mission and vision statements, and that's often a part of a strategic planning process. But if you don't have a plan for how to realize that vision, then you can kind of get stuck. And I heard this quote before that was something like, you don't rise to the level of the goals, you fall to the level of your systems. And I think what that quote is really trying to get at is it's great to have goals, and we all talk about writing goals down, in our personal life. But if you don't have actual tangible steps lined out in order to meet those goals, then you might not be able to achieve them. So strategic planning is a way for you to do that. I think one of the things I'd really like to highlight in this presentation is the fact that strategic planning, however much you end up accomplishing in your strategic plan, it can really help build your staff, because it really creates a process for staff buy-in. If you involve the whole library in creating the strategic plan, then everybody is invested in a shared vision of where the library is going. And that has benefits for teamwork, collaboration, morale, beyond whatever the success of any one or two particular initiatives are. And then lastly, it really can help contribute to institutional assessment efforts. So, many of you at your respective institutions, I'm sure, are required to do annual assessments of some kind, reporting, and sometimes it can feel like at the end of the year, you're just like scrambling. Oh no, oh yeah, we were supposed to assess something. What was that again? And oftentimes it's just the director or a couple of key people in the library that might be doing that assessment. Strategic planning can help actually make the assessment process more meaningful for you as a leader or a staff person, but also involving the whole library. So I think it can really be useful in that way as well. So now, taking all of that, I want to move on and talk a little bit about what is our institutional context, and a little bit about the library and why we initiated a strategic plan. So Our Lady of the Lake University is a small private Catholic institution, and we are located on the historic west side of the city of San Antonio. But we also have campus sites in Houston and the Rio Grande Valley. We have online as well as distance education. And we serve undergraduate and graduate students with over 60 undergraduate majors, 14 master's programs, and 3 doctoral programs. We are a Hispanic and minority serving institution with over 78% of our undergraduates identifying as Hispanic. That actually makes us the 4th largest Hispanic serving institution by percentage of student population. And we also have a very large population of first generation students. So that's our institutional context, and it's also very important to recognize that as we were developing our goals and objectives, that institutional context really plays a part in what our strategic plan looked like, because again, we're user focused. So the Sister Elizabeth Ann Sueltenfuss Library opened in 2000. So it's actually one of the newer buildings on campus. We have some very old, beautiful historical buildings. The library is relatively new, and it was built during a time of transition when, that kind of print to electronic transition was really going strong, and a much greater emphasis on the need for an investment for technology. But over the last 20 years or so, because we just celebrated our 20th birthday, things had kind of just been rolling along for a long time without a lot of sort of focus into the future and adopting new services and trends. There was some new leadership. So I started at Our Lady of the Lake University as the Assistant Dean for Instruction of User Services in the library in January of 2018. And unexpectedly, our dean retired. And so that put me in an interim position for a while. But there had also been some other longtime library employees who retired or moved on. And so when I say in a time of transition, there really was kind of this feeling that we were in a shift in eras for the library. When I started working there, one of the people that I worked with said, when I first started here, I really felt like, we were not really, there was no motivation to really do anything new or try new things. It was kind of that feeling of stuckness. But then she said, now I see that there's a lot of new staff and new energy coming in. And so I'm excited about, how we can harness that to move the library forward. There was a real need at that time to update some of our systems, our processes, and our services. So, for example, we were operating on our legacy ILS system, which was not great and really hampered some of our efforts. And it really was the same system with, of course, updates that we had been using since we had transitioned from a card catalog in the 90s. When I started, the former dean had actually, before my time, had started to initiate a strategic planning process, but then for whatever reason, different things came up and the process was never completed. But they were able to develop a mission statement and a vision statement that the staff at the time of my arrival still felt really positive about, felt good that these were good statements that represented the direction that the library wanted to go in. So we didn't redo that work as part of our strategic planning. We started from the basis that we already had strong mission and vision statements. And the other transitional thing that was happening at that time was that the university was launching their new strategic plan. So at that time, they were kind of right in between the completion of the strategic plan and the start of the implementation of the strategic plan. So for all of these reasons, this was a real opportunity for the library to say, okay, here's some spaces opened up. There are new voices, there's new things going on. This is a great time for us to think about the future of the library. And so that is what we decided to do. So what did our process look like? In the fall of 2018, I appointed a library task force, and I think this is really key. So I did not lead the strategic planning task force. I appointed one of our librarians, who is at the time, our systems and web services librarian, to lead the task force, and I had kind of a consultative role as the director. But I think it was really important that I didn't want to be in the group sort of imposing what I thought my ideas might be. I really wanted all of the ideas to flow upward from the staff. So I appointed a library task force that represented both departments of the library, user services and our systems and technical services people, and people in different roles. And I provided guiding resources and parameters. I talked a little bit about what I wanted them to do in order to initiate this process. That team met biweekly throughout the fall 2018, and during that time, they gathered a lot of data and input, which I'll talk about a little bit more. And then from there, they had draft documents that were then reviewed and provided feedback until we came with a final draft. And the final draft was really completed around the end of the summer 2019, and then given official administrative approval right at the end of 2019, and we started our implementation in January of 2020, right in time for a global pandemic. So I'll talk a little bit about that too. So as I mentioned, part of my role in the strategic planning process was to kind of set the parameters of the strategic planning process. So there were several things that I wanted the task force to consider in their development of the strategic plan draft. First was our library mission and vision statements, and I already kind of mentioned that we already had strong statements and that I thought that the strategic plan should really flow from those. I also wanted the task force to review ACRL guidelines and best practices for academic libraries in higher education. I also wanted them to look at peer institutions, similar institutions to Our Lady of the Lake University, to get a sense of what are some of the other things going on in academic libraries similar to ours at this time. And then, of course, I wanted them to really consider the university strategic plan because, again, that aligning with institutional priorities. Then we went through a lot of data and input. And so there were several different strategies that we employed to accomplish this. The first was that we did surveys. We did a survey of library staff, including all of our work study students, and we also did a survey of a campus survey. We also got informal feedback through tabling at the cafeteria, through interactive bulletin boards in the library, and through conversations with students and with each other about what our experiences were. The task force also conducted a SWOT analysis. And so if you're not familiar with that, that is strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats. And that's kind of a way for you to think about what are some of the challenges and hurdles that the library might face in implementing a plan, but what are also some of the strengths that can be drawn on in implementing a strategic plan. Of course, as needed, we looked at library usage data to get a sense of, how are our current programs and services doing, and what other things might we benefit from adding. And then, as I mentioned, doing kind of a peer comparison. And our strategic plan task force looked at IPEDS data and also visited different websites of peer institutions in order to kind of compile a sense of what other peer institutions were doing. So most of this presentation, right, is about our process and not the details of our actual strategic plan, but I did give you a sense of what some of our surveys look like. The survey on the left is the survey that was conducted of our library staff, and the survey on the right is a word cloud that represents the survey from our campus community. And so you can see here that there is definitely some significant overlap, but some interesting differences too. And I thought it was interesting that a lot of the phrases on the student word cloud were more books, more computers, more study rooms, more Spanish books, more, which is great in a way because it indicates that we are kind of on the right track, right? But we need more. So as I mentioned, after all of this data and input was compiled, then the task force got to work on creating a draft, which looked very much like some larger goals with bullets underneath of smaller objectives that were part of that overall goal. And so at that point, I provided feedback and met with the task force to talk about, what I thought about the plan and where I thought maybe there was needed to be some more specificity. We also worked with our institutional effectiveness office. We have a wonderful director of assessment and accreditation who came in and actually kind of workshop with us on how do you write objectives? How do you write goals? What is assessment? And that was very helpful for us, not only in the drafting of the plan, but also in the implementation phase. And then we also gathered a library staff feedback. So once there was drafts, we sent them out to the staff. I think we did at least one additional survey saying, what do you guys think about this plan? And then we did some workshopping at our annual staff retreat around the plan, and specifically now that we have these goals and objectives, how do we want to break this down into an actual process for implementation, right? Which things do we want to prioritize to do first? How will we know if we're successful? So those were some of the activities that we did at our annual retreat. So this slide shows you our 5-year strategic plan. As you can see, the goals, there are 6 goals listed at the top, and underneath each goal is the actual written goal. And then underneath that are the numbered objectives divided out into the years. So it was kind of an interesting process trying to determine what we wanted to tackle first. By the way, these are short titles for each of these objectives. They actually have longer descriptions that couldn't fit in this table. But we it was looking at what is some low-hanging fruit that we can build some momentum on right away. What are projects that are longer term? What things do we have resources for right now versus things that we might need to advocate resources for? So that's kind of how we went about dividing it into different years for implementation. So during our implementation phase, we had overall, our plan has 6 goals and 31 objectives, and we had 16 of those objectives planned for implementation in year 1. So you could probably tell that when you were looking at that table that it was very heavily emphasized in year 1, which I actually think worked out well because it allows us some flexibility, and I'll talk about that some more as we move forward over the next couple years. It's okay to move things around. I don't think that there's I haven't encountered any rule that says you can't do that. So in order to get going on these 16 objectives planned for implementation at year 1, in January 2020, we had some staff meetings where we looked at who was interested in working on which objectives, and we divided out into teams and selected team leaders for each of those teams. Now, the nature of the objective really defined the team. So sometimes the team was an actual department, sometimes it was just 1 or 2 people. But many of the teams, which I think are great, are people working across the 2 different departments of the library together, which I really think strengthens because you get multiple perspectives of different people in the library who serve in different roles, contributing to meeting that objective. But it was important that you do define a team leader, because what our experience is if there isn't one person responsible for something, then nobody is responsible for it. So there were a couple objectives that got a little slowed down because it was like, oh, this group is responsible for it, but they didn't have like a team leader attached. So that's an important component. From my perspective, there were really 2 administrative questions to consider when it came to the implementation of the library strategic plan. First, how are we going to document and track our progress? And 2, what tools would help our teams organize and conduct their work? So we kind of needed some project management strategies for implementation of our strategic plan. So I then again consulted with our institutional effectiveness office and the director of assessment, and we had some great conversations about how we could manage this project. And she let me know that the university was using our software Nuventive Improve in order to build out and track the university strategic plan. And I was familiar with Nuventive Improve because it's also the software that houses our unit assessment, and so I had some experience with it. From there, we actually worked with our Nuventive rep to build out the strategic plan the way we wanted it in Nuventive, and we're still tweaking this. So this work has kind of been going on as we've been implementing, and so it's going to be even stronger in year 2. I really wanted to show you, the interactive piece of it, but that was going to be a little technologically difficult. But this is a screenshot that you can see right here, kind of the homepage of the strategic plan. And what you'll see is that the goals are here at the top, and then there are objectives underneath. And this section is actually called Objectives and Actions. So the teams can actually go in here and add actions. So for example, one of our strategic initiatives was to develop a new collection development policy. And so as that team met and made progress toward meeting that goal, they could document what the different actions were. One action was to look at different collection development policies of other academic libraries to get ideas about how to write a collection development policy. And so then you can assign people certain tasks, and you can create deadlines, and you can have like a little progress indicator, right? Is this started? Is this in progress? Is it complete? So you can kind of see that a little bit here. There's also, as you'll notice over here on the left-hand side, an updates feature. So the goal for this part of the process is that the planning teams could provide semesterly updates to me about all of what's going on. So instead of these discrete little individual actions, they could kind of just give one summary of here's where we are at. Here are things that we still need in order to complete the process. And again, plan to do those twice a year, once in the fall and once in the spring. That's something we're still working out a little bit, and we're still working with our Nuventive rep to kind of get the updates feature working the way that we want it. But what I can show you is this is an example of the type of report that we can get from our software that allows me to look at the strategic plan really holistically. So this is just the cover page. It's a very long document, but it goes through and it shows you all of the different objectives. And then this column shows you the actions that were completed and when they were completed. And then this will be these we were testing here, but this column would actually be where the updates would appear. So it allows you to get a really good sense of everything that's been done on the strategic plan. So if you're really big on like lists and tracking and stuff like that, like I am, I found this to be very helpful. It really is nice also in order when I'm having conversations with different people on campus about the library strategic plan, specifically our provost or other administrators. It's really nice to be able to show them, like, look at all of this work that we have completed over the last year. So year one review, what were our results? As I mentioned, we were very heavily had a lot of objectives for year one, 16 out of the 31. Out of those 16 objectives, we completed 6 of them. 7 are initiated or ongoing, and 3 were not initiated. So I'll go through that a little bit. So this is our table again, but in this slide, I've color coded it so that you can see that the objectives in green are objectives that were completed in year one. The ones in blue are initiated or ongoing, and the ones in red were not initiated. So just starting with the ones in red, modernize library space, advocate for hiring, and online collections. There were really 2 reasons why these did not get initiated in year one as we had planned. The big one was COVID, and I'll talk even more about that in just a minute, but because of COVID throwing the whole university into chaos, it wasn't really a great time, for example, to advocate for new hiring. It also wasn't a great time to talk about library space since we were all abandoning campus and going to fully online remote operations for several months. The other objective that didn't get initiated, online collections, didn't get initiated because the team leader that was doing that left the university, and so we weren't able to reassign a team leader. So I think one important thing to point out here is that with 16 objectives and a very small academic library, we have people working on multiple objectives. So any given person in the library might be working on I would say probably 1 to 3 objectives. So those are the ones that didn't get initiated. The blue ones are ones that we were able to start and just haven't fully realized completion of those, or they are long-term projects that will continue into year 2 and year 3. And one of the things to consider when you're writing objectives is what defines completion, right? When will you say this has been completed? And one thing that you can think about is something operationalized? So, you needed to have a specific group or a specific team work on it to get it going, but now it's part of your normal operational plan. It's part of your normal workflows. And so maybe you can mark it complete, even though the work, of course, continues to go on. So there's a couple of examples of that on here. We have a marketing committee, and the goal of that was that they would develop recommendations and make a marketing plan for the library, which they did. And so, but now they will continue to work on marketing for the library, but that's now operationalized. So we still have it as ongoing because we plan that there is still a little bit of work to do in year 2 and year 3. But that's one that will eventually be completed and kind of considered operationalized. Okay. So you probably are all wondering, what about COVID? How did this impact our strategic plan? So as I mentioned, we really started implementation in January of 2020. And by March, we were all leaving campus. So we had barely done anything yet. We had divided out into teams and assigned team leaders, and several of those teams had an opportunity to meet, but that was about it at the time. And so what were some of the impact? Change timelines. So of course, some of the things that we had planned for year one will get reassigned to other years of the strategic plan. And then that has kind of a domino effect, right? So then things from year two might move a little bit further out. It delayed implementation. So one of our year one objectives was to implement a room reservation program, which we actually were able to do, and piloted that this spring, and will continue to implement that in the fall. But it delayed implementation, and because of the building closure, we weren't even sure if we would even get to that objective at all. And so one of the things I said was, well, hey, let's go ahead and let's think about what are the steps that need to be taken in order to do that. For example, some of our study rooms need to be keyed so that we could do the room reservation system the way that we wanted to. So could we go ahead and get that work done? We needed to develop a policy for our room reservation. So that's work that could continue even though we weren't able to implement the program right away. I think the big thing, though, are the next 2 points, and that is that it really reframed conversations about the future. So I mentioned at the beginning that strategic planning is really about envisioning future and future needs. And COVID really created a sense of uncertainty about the future. We were functioning actually very well, I would say, that we were one of the units on campus that was best prepared to move all of our operations remotely. And that initiated a whole bunch of conversations among our library team about what is the nature of online learning going forward, and what is the nature of library support online going forward. And specifically because we do have a lot of distance and online students as well, we realized new ways that we were able to better serve those student constituencies that we hadn't thought of before. So really thinking about those things will help inform our strategic planning going forward. And I don't think any of those issues are resolved, right? We're still kind of going to wait and see what is the long-term impact from COVID and all of the changes to higher education during COVID. The other really big impact from COVID was that it really diminished staff time and resources. So again, we're a small staff, limited resources, everybody's wearing multiple hats, everybody's working on multiple projects. Then you throw in COVID. And now we need to put all of our energy and resources toward moving our operations online. That happened in March. We were closed through the summer, and then we did a partial reopening in the fall. So we were open this year, but we had a lot of restrictions. Our study rooms weren't open. We didn't do stack browsing. So then we had to plan for that reopening. So all of that took an enormous amount of staff time and energy that could have been used toward implementation of our strategic plan. But that's okay. Sometimes, my mom always says, like, you can plan the plan, but you can't plan the outcome. And that's very true. So what are some, beyond COVID, what are some of the major challenges to strategic planning? I kind of already alluded to this, but it takes a lot of time. So we started the strategic planning process in fall of 2018, and pretty much we're working on developing the plan and planning the implementation through 2019. So we didn't actually start implementation until 2020. So that planning process took a long time. And I think that's important because you really want the opportunity to have all of the conversations that are necessary to really develop a plan that's going to work for your library. Another challenge is that circumstances change, right? What was going on and what the circumstances were when we started the plan in the fall of 2018 versus now are different. And even without having had a global pandemic, that would be true, right? You're not implementing a plan in a vacuum. New things come up, and I think you have to be sort of flexible and ready to adapt to those changing circumstances. So that is one challenge. Another major challenge is insufficient resources to meet all your objectives. Some of our objectives, we would really like to purchase a new software, or we would really like to update the library's furniture, or, different things that require funding. And so that is going to be a challenge if, you have a really tight budget, which we do. So some of our objectives are aimed at, funding sources for the library, which you may have noted on there. So we sort of built in something to kind of help with the fact that we knew that limited resources was going to be a challenge. Staff changes. I mentioned that one of our strategic initiatives was being led by somebody that left, and so that one was not completed. So if you have staff changes, that can really throw things off. And then I think another thing is that, and then I kind of talked about this with the impact of COVID, but the urgent can crowd out the important. There's all of those day-to-day things that have to go on to make the library run smoothly and well. And so when you're in the midst of doing all of those day-to-day operational tasks, sometimes strategic planning can just fall through the cracks, right? The implementation, it's like, oh, this team has not been able to meet for a while because we were focusing on performance reviews were due, or, something else was going on. And so really finding that balance, but also patience. So another thing I'll just mention is that our year one implementation was really a year and a half, because it really went from January 2020 through this last spring semester. So we'll actually be starting year two implementation this fall, which is nice because we can kind of use the summer to do some assessment of year one, some reflection, what did we learn, how do we want to adapt for year two. And then the last challenge is that implementation will need constant attention to stay on track. You can't just say, oh, here are our objectives, go. You have to really follow up. And that's why having something to track that progress. So for us, we're using Nuventive, but we're also using other tools like Microsoft Teams and some other things like that that really help our team stay on track. And then you need that check-in. And whether you do, monthly updates at your library staff meeting, or if you have quarterly check-ins, or, for us, it's, we're going to be using that update feature in Nuventive. It needs attention. It's not something that you just set in motion and then it goes on its own. So what are the takeaways and lessons learned? And then I would really like to open it up to questions and hear about some of your experiences. The lessons learned and the things that I think would be great to take away from our experience are: one, get user input. It's really important to take a user-centered approach. I feel that one of the strengths of our library is that we know our users really, really well, and we know what some of their struggles are. So I think that building that into your strategic planning process, how are you going to get the buy-in from the larger community, and especially your students, is really important. The next one is my personal favorite, and that is put staff in charge. Again, I did not chair the strategic planning task force, partly because I know myself and I know that I would be like, what about this? What about that? And I didn't want and as the director, I didn't want my ideas to be overweighted or overrepresented in the group. I really wanted to know, what do my staff really think and what are their ideas? And sometimes by removing myself and letting those conversations happen over here organically, then those can come and filter up. And in large part, there was a lot of alignment there between, what some of my thinking was and what our team came up with. But I think the other benefit of this is that if the whole team works on it and they're now invested in it. And so they're going to be there with you during the implementation process, much more so than if it's like, okay, you're leading every step of the way. Also, delegating is awesome because if you're using all of your staff resources instead of just putting the major components on one or two people in the library, that can really help move things along as well. Also, use institutional resources. So when I was going through that question about what are we going to do, how are we going to track this, what are the tools that are available, not only that, but also just how do you do strategic planning? I found that our Office of Institutional Effectiveness, and particularly Maddie, our Director of Assessment, was amazing. She's come in several times. So I mentioned she came in to talk with us in the planning phase about implementing, how do you write objectives? How do you write goals? What's the difference? But she also has come in and done training on Nuventive with us. And I do periodic check-ins with her, and we just have a lot of really great conversations about strategic planning and about assessment and its importance. And so there are both going to be maybe software resources that your university already has, or individuals that can be resources for you at your institution. So try to find what are those institutional resources you already have that you don't have to go out and find or reinvent the wheel. And again, I already talked about this too, but keep assessment in mind. So for us, the strategic plan now becomes our assessment plan. And so that's a way for us to also track the progress, right? Because we will be selecting objectives every year to include in our assessment plan and assessing those. And last but not least, certainly, is be flexible. Like I said, there's really no punishment if you have to change course or if you have to move things around in your strategic plan. I think part of that is probably to be expected, that once you get going with the implementation, you learn new things, and then you want to incorporate those new things that you learned back into your plan. And like I said, I'm kind of looking forward to the fact that we have our summer and we're going to have another staff retreat. So we're going to have an opportunity to kind of look at what are the adjustments that we want to make. And so be flexible and be ready to incorporate new information as it comes along. And this concludes my presentation, but again, I would really love to hear some of your questions or ideas or comments. These are just some resources and references that were really helpful for us in our presentation. So thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Maria. That was awesome. If anyone has any questions, I guess you can use the chat, or feel free to unmute yourself if you want to talk. I guess you were just very comprehensive, Maria. We have a quiet group this afternoon. I guess maybe, there's one that came in from Rebecca. Did you already have a mission and a vision?
Yeah, so that is something I mentioned, I think just a little bit at the beginning. So when I had started the library, they had tried to start a strategic planning process a couple years before I came in and got stuck. But they had developed a mission and a vision statement. And so when I arrived and started thinking about strategic planning, and in my discussions with the staff, those were like, we worked really hard on those and they took a lot of time. Like, let's not reinvent those. Everybody felt really good about them. So they could then become kind of guiding documents to the rest of the strategic planning process. So yes, I think that's a really good question, because normally, strategic planning probably would start there with developing mission and vision statements. And for us, that work was already completed. And then I see there's another question. How did accessibility fit into your work? So I'm not sure if I understand the question.
I guess the question is, like, was it part of your strategic plan? How did it flow in? Was it woven in? Was it separate?
Well, we do yes, we do have a strategic objective that's all about accessibility, and that one's actually slated for implementation in year 2. And that one is a group that's really looking at making the library accessible. And that's not just services, but also policy, right? It's kind of reviewing the library's policies and procedures and making sure that we are accessible. So that is built into our strategic plan for sure. And I'm happy to talk a little bit more about what some of our other strategic plans are, if that's of interest too.
I see we've got a bunch of stuff coming in the chat here. how many librarians do you have and how many people were on the task teams?
Okay, that's a great question. We have 6 librarians, including myself, and we have 6 support staff. So we're a small library. And so when I said people are serving on multiple stuff, yeah, that was definitely true. And then how many people were on task teams? Everybody in the library is on the strategic plan. Everybody. Some people are working on one thing. Some people are working on multiple things. People's roles vary, and also, the work involved in a particular initiative, might be more for one group than it is for another. So we try to do, look at workload balance and also what are people interested in working on. I think one of the benefits of strategic planning is that oftentimes you're just like working on your one role. And this allows people an opportunity to kind of say, well, I would really be interested in working on, marketing for the library. And maybe that doesn't have anything to do with, cataloging, but they're interested in it. And so it gives people an opportunity to work across department lines and really work towards some shared goals. And so everybody works on it. I don't know if that was the full question, but yeah, all of our team members work on it, and the teams vary in size.
And Rebecca, it looks like, had a follow-up question. Will that include collection development? Does that have to do with the accessibility question, Rebecca? Sorry.
Yes, sorry.
Okay. No, it's okay.
Well, we did create, our year 1 objective was create a collection development policy. And that took us a whole year. That was like a really hard objective. We had a collection development policy that was really outdated. And so accessibility is addressed in that policy as well. And so we did have conversations about that when we were drafting our collection development policy. So my thinking is that when we get to the accessibility objective, we're going to be looking more at other components of the library services and resources. But we did address accessibility in our collection development.
Great. And I believe there's another question about having access to the PowerPoint. I believe the PowerPoints will be distributed, I think. Not 100% sure.
Yes, I can certainly make those available. And, my contact information, my email address is on that slide. It's mecabaniss@ollUSA.edu. I'm happy to, share anything that would be helpful for anybody. I really started from the ground up on this process. Didn't know, I had taken a project management course in graduate school and some other management courses, but really didn't have any specific strategic planning experience. And so I'm happy to share, anything that would be helpful.
Okay, yes, I believe the PowerPoints will be emailed out. Yes, okay, great. Any other questions before we wrap up for the day? Or for this session, I guess. Great. So thank you everyone for attending, and thank you again, Maria. That was great. We can hang out for a few minutes if anyone has any questions while we transition over. And it looks like there's a couple more sessions today, starting at 2:15 and then again at 3:30. So hope you all enjoy the last few hours of the conference. Thanks a lot.